The stranger who wasn't supposed to come. The Texas sun hung heavy in the sky, bleeding gold across the wide plains. Dust lifted from the road with every gust of wind, swirling around the wooden post office that doubled as a stagecoach stop. Inside, a man in his early 30s stood by the counter, boots worn from years of ranch work, hat tilted low to hide the anxiety on his face. His name was Caleb Turner, a cattleman by trade. Caleb had spent the last 10 years building his small ranch after the war. Life on the frontier was hard, lonely, and mercilessly quiet. The cattle didn't talk, and neighbors were scarce. For years, he told himself he didn't need much more than his land and his herd. But loneliness had a way of gnawing through even the toughest hide. That's when he'd sent for a mail-order bride. Her name, at least in the letters, was Evelyn Harper, a schoolteacher from back east. Her handwriting had been delicate, her words careful but warm. Caleb had read those letters over and over, by lantern light after long days, imagining the sound of her voice. She had agreed to come to Texas, to marry a man she had never seen, and to make a home with him on the frontier. So here he was, waiting, nervous as a boy on his first cattle drive. The stagecoach rumbled down the road, wheels creaking, dust trailing in its wake. Caleb's heart kicked in his chest. He straightened his hat, smoothed his shirt, and rehearsed what he might say when she stepped down. But the person who stepped off the coach was not Evelyn Harper. She was tall for a woman, with a long coat that swept the dust, boots scuffed from hard travel, and a hat pulled low over piercing green eyes. Strapped to her hip was a revolver, and she wore it like someone who knew how to use it. The stage driver gave her a wary glance as she swung her saddlebag over one shoulder and lit a cigarette with steady hands. Caleb blinked. Surely, this wasn't her. The woman's gaze swept the small crowd. 2 old men waiting for mail, a shopkeeper's boy, and Caleb, standing straight as a fence post. She strode toward him with the kind of confidence that turned heads and made men swallow hard. "You Caleb Turner?" she asked, her voice low and edged with grit. Caleb stiffened. "I am. And you are?" The woman smirked, smoke curling from her lips. "Your bride. Didn't expect me, did ya?" A stunned silence dropped between them. Caleb's mouth opened, then closed. This wasn't the soft-spoken schoolteacher who had written him tender letters about books and quiet evenings. This woman was all sharp edges, leather, and danger. You're Evelyn Harper?" he finally managed. The woman chuckled, shaking her head. "Name's Nora Kane. Don't look so rattled, cowboy. Evelyn ain't coming. Let's just say she and I had a run-in back in Abilene. She ain't making it to Texas. I took her place." Caleb's blood ran cold. "What do you mean she ain't coming? What did you do to her?" Nora stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Relax, cowboy. She's alive, far as I know. But plans change. You're sure as hell just did." The postmaster cleared his throat awkwardly, pretending to shuffle letters while keeping an eye on them. Caleb felt every pair of eyes in town drilling into his back. "You can't just—" Caleb began, but Nora cut him off, her hand brushing the grip of her revolver. "Listen, Turner, I need a place to lay low. You need a woman to make it look like you ain't living out there all by your lonesome. Lucky for both of us, I'm handy with a gun, and I can work harder than most men you'll hire. So unless you want to explain to your neighbors why your precious bride never showed, you're going to play along." Caleb's jaw clenched. He'd expected a wife, a partner to share his quiet life. Instead, he had an outlaw standing in front of him, demanding shelter. But as he looked into her eyes, steady, dangerous, and yet carrying something he couldn't name, he realized he didn't have much choice. "Fine," he muttered, tipping his hat low. "But you're not my wife. You're just a guest, and you'll follow my rules on my land." Nora grinned, sharp and wolf-like. "We'll see about that." They rode out together on horseback, dust rising beneath the hooves. Caleb's ranch lay 5 miles outside town, a modest spread with a cabin, a barn, and open fields stretching to the horizon. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the creak of saddles and the occasional snort of the horses. Finally, Caleb asked, "You going to tell me why you're running?" Nora lit another cigarette, her green eyes flashing beneath the brim of her hat. "Let's just say the law's got my name on a few wanted posters. Stagecoach robbery, bank job gone south, maybe a shooting or two. Nothing you need to lose sleep over. Nothing Caleb's grip tightened on the reins. Lady, the rangers come sniffing around, and I'll be the one answering questions. You've brought trouble to my land. Or protection, she countered smoothly. Face it, cowboy, you're out here alone. No wife, no family. Just cattle and fences. A woman like me might be the only thing keeping rustlers or bandits from taking what's yours. Caleb shot her a hard look. He didn't trust her, not one bit. But he couldn't deny the truth of her words. Life out here was dangerous. Maybe having an outlaw on his side wasn't the worst thing. When they reached the ranch, Nora slid from her horse and looked around with an appraising eye. Not bad, she said. Could use a woman's touch. Shame I ain't that kind of woman. Caleb ignored the jab and started unsaddling the horses. He wasn't about to let her think she could rile him. But as he stole a glance at her, her lean figure, the confidence in her stride, he felt a mix of irritation and something he couldn't quite name. This wasn't what he'd planned, but maybe plans didn't matter anymore. Maybe fate had sent him not the bride he expected, but the woman he needed. That night, the prairie wind howled against the cabin walls. Caleb sat by the fire, staring at the flames, while Nora cleaned her revolver at the table. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. You can stay. For now. But the first sign of trouble, you're gone. Understand. Nora smirked without looking up. Understood, cowboy. But you'll see. Trouble has a way of finding us both. Outside, a coyote howled. Inside, two strangers sat under the same roof, bound by circumstance, mistrust, and a spark neither wanted to admit. And so began a story neither of them had expected, when trouble rode to the ranch. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn, as he always did. The rooster hadn't even crowed yet when he pulled on his boots and stepped outside into the chill. The prairie was quiet, save for the whisper of wind across the grass. He expected to find Nora still asleep, but the glow of a lantern in the barn told him otherwise. Curious, Caleb walked in. There she was, coat tossed aside, sleeves rolled, mucking out stalls like she'd been raised on a ranch her whole life. A cigarette dangled from her lips, and she worked with the same no-nonsense energy she'd shown since stepping off the stage. You don't strike me as the type to rise before the sun, Caleb said, leaning against the doorway. Nora glanced up, smirking. I don't strike you as a lot of things. Don't mean I can't surprise you. She tossed another pitchfork of hay and looked him square in the eye. Don't think this means I'm turning housewife. But if I'm staying, I'll pull my weight. Caleb gave a slow nod. He wasn't about to say it aloud, but a part of him was impressed. By noon, the day turned hot. Caleb took her out to mend fence lines. He expected her to complain, but Nora handled the work with grit, her hands blistering but steady. When a rattlesnake slithered too close to the posts, Caleb reached for his rifle. But Nora had already drawn her revolver and fired clean through its head before he could lift the barrel. Reflexes, cowboy, she said, blowing smoke from the barrel. You ought to learn some. Caleb gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Truth was, she was proving herself in ways he hadn't expected. Still, mistrust sat heavy in his chest. That night, over stew at the cabin, he finally asked the question that had gnawed at him since her arrival. Why'd you do it? Why take Evelyn's place? Nora sipped from a tin cup, her eyes shadowed in the firelight. Because a woman like me don't get many second chances. The law's been breathing down my neck since I was 17. I robbed my first bank to pay for food. Shot a man who thought he could have me without a skin. And every step since then, I've been running. When I saw that schoolmarm heading west with her ticket to a new life, I thought, why not me? Her gaze locked on his. Why not me, cowboy? Why can't I have what decent folk get handed so easy? Caleb stared into the fire, torn between anger and something softer. He should have run her off the moment she stepped down from that coach. Yet here she was, sitting at his table, speaking with a raw honesty that cut through his defenses. Before he could answer, a sound outside shattered the moment. Hooves. Several of them. Caleb's hand went to his rifle, and Nora was already at the window, revolver in hand. Dust rose in the moonlight as 4 riders came into view, silhouettes hard against the night. "Who are they?" Caleb muttered. Nora's jaw tightened. "Not friends." The riders pulled up at the gate, their leader calling out with a voice like gravel. "Nora Kane, we know you're here. Best come out peaceful." Caleb's blood ran cold. He turned to her. "What the hell have you brought to my door?" Her eyes burned with a mix of fear and defiance. "Men I used to ride with. They don't like it when somebody quits the game. Outlaws. Worse," she said. "Killers." The leader's voice boomed again. "We ain't waiting, Nora. You got 5 minutes before we light this place up." Caleb cursed under his breath. He'd wanted a wife, a quiet home, peace after years of hard labor. Instead, trouble had ridden straight to his doorstep, wearing 6 guns and hate. "You need to leave," Caleb said, his voice low. "Now, take a horse and run. I won't be part of this." But Nora shook her head, fire blazing in her green eyes. "No, Cowboy, I ain't running anymore. If they want me, they'll have to go through both of us." "Both of us?" Caleb snapped. "This ain't my fight." Her gaze softened just enough to make his chest ache. "It is now." The next minutes blurred into chaos. Caleb barred the door, shoved the table against the window, and loaded his rifle. Nora crouched low, revolvers ready, eyes sharp as a hawk's. Gunfire cracked across the night. Bullets splintered the wood. Caleb fired back, his shots precise, honed from years of hunting. Beside him, Nora moved like lightning, her revolvers barking fire, driving the outlaws into cover. "Not bad, Cowboy," she shouted over the din. "You're not so bad yourself," he growled, racking the rifle again. The fight raged for what felt like hours. Then silence. One outlaw lay dead by the fence, another groaning in the dirt. The leader and his last man turned tail, retreating into the night with curses on their lips. When the dust settled, Caleb dropped into a chair, chest heaving. Nora holstered her guns, walking to the window to make sure they were gone. "They'll be back," she muttered. Caleb rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing on him. "And when they do, what then? Keep fighting until the whole territory's after us." Nora turned, her expression softer than he'd ever seen. "I don't know, but for the first time in years, I don't want to run. Not from them. Not from this." "This?" Caleb asked. She stepped closer, kneeling by his chair, her hand brushing his. "You. This place. The way you look at me like I could be more than the sum of my sins." Caleb's throat tightened. He'd never been a man for fancy words. But in that moment, he felt something shift, like the prairie itself had turned beneath his boots. "Your trouble, Nora Kane," he whispered. Her lips curved into a half-smile. "Maybe, but I'm her kind of trouble." Dawn broke over the plains, painting the sky in fire and gold. The ranch bore scars from the night, splintered wood, bullet holes, blood in the dirt. But still stood, and so did they. As Caleb saddled his horse to ride fence lines, Nora stepped onto the porch, watching him with a look that was no longer just sharp defiance, but something warmer, something searching. The cowboy had waited for a bride he thought would give him peace. Instead, fate had delivered him a woman with guns on her hips and ghosts on her back. And though Caleb Turner didn't know what tomorrow would bring, lawmen, outlaws, or worse, he knew one thing for certain. He'd never be lonely again.